Hi, good morning, and welcome to the ZP Vlogging Podcast. So we like to do this vlogging podcast every Sunday at 8 a.m. and it's really just a sort of wrap up on ZP news for this week. So it's been a bit of a short week in terms of news, but we did put some material out there this week. One of them was about non-invasive glucose monitoring. So there's been a lot of effort, let's say, over the years, easily for 2 decades now, on trying to monitor glucose through the skin using parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. And the kind of parts, when I say that, I mean people have tried infrared spectroscopy, microwave parts of the spectrum, and also radio frequency parts of the spectrum. Now, at this moment, there are none of these products actually on the market. And I think it's not because of want of trying. It's basically just because it's fundamentally quite hard. And so, for example, if you look, and Apple have quite a lot of patents around the use of midwave infrared, to actually monitor glucose through the skin. Obviously, at this moment, they don't have a product on the market. And again, I think it's not because of lack of trying. I think it's actually just because it is actually really hard. So we did put a video out there this week about describing the challenges and the scientific sort of fundamental challenges on this. And I think it really came down to kind of probably at least two problems. One of them was the concentration of the glucose. The glucose is actually quite high in blood, for example. It's at 5 millimolar, so relative to other molecules, that's quite high. But then relative to kind of the background interference, which is probably water, which is at 55 molar, you've got a real problem with sort of chemical concentration. So it is quite challenging, let's say, to do. So we did put a video out there about that this week. Something that we're very focused on at the moment at ZP is our food sense. Food sense and Sensi All are really the same thing. So Sensi All is our way of helping people get to the market with a minimally viable prototype really quickly. And then we actually display the functionality of Sensi All through Food Sense, and we sell Food Sense as well. Now, in supporting Food Sense, we always say to people, look, we support you through we do personalized training, which we do. We do weekly webinars and we do monthly demos. So as part of the weekly webinars, we take the questions that have come in for the week, which this week was like how convert from micromolar to SHU. Micromolar is just a kind of is a concentration term that chemists like. So when we talk about capsaicin, chemists would like to talk about micromolar. Some of them would like to talk about ppm, parts per million. But actually the real industry really likes to talk about Scoville heat units. So we did talk about how to transfer between those two different units. Somebody else was kind of interested in understanding whether they could use data, even when they've got very concentrated capsaicin. Sometimes some of the signal is, like, say, cut off, and whether that data is actually still useful to them. And the quick answer is it was, and I sort of went through the reasons as to why on that. Something else that was kind of interesting is when you deal with heterogeneous samples, and I think chili powders and ginger powders are probably a very good example of that. These things are intrinsically heterogeneous. You can't expect to be sampling the powder or the products made from these powders and get like the same result every time, because where you take the sample will end up influencing the actual let's say pungency of the ginger or the Scoville heat unit of the capsaicin. So we did talk about also that. We also talked about outlier rejection, that you can have, and I don't want to say it like, freaky results, but you can end up having kind of freaky results. Oh, yeah, this is a terrible term, but, high results. And, is this real or is this actually an outlier? So we actually talked about how to do outlier rejection, which is to look at your, so let's say you did 5 measurements. You would have an average or a mean for those 5 measurements, and you would also be able to determine the standard deviation for those 5 measurements. And we were able to show that if you do the average plus or minus that 2 standard deviations, and your result was outside of that average plus or minus 2 standard deviations, it was okay to reject that result, because I think it's about 95% certain that that is an outlier. Now, I was also arguing that in the pharmaceutical industry or in medical diagnostics, you may not be able to reject that because actually they would want to do average plus or minus 3 standard deviations, which would give them something like a 99% certainty of not rejecting something that was otherwise valid. But in the food industry, I think where the margins are much lower, you can't afford to have that kind of stringency. And especially, I was thinking about food quality rather than food safety. In food quality, it's okay to sort of have a 95% certainty, whereas in food safety you might want to have a 99% certainty. So we did cover that as well. And then there was the question is, why do we have outliers? And it's hard but again, you've got heterogeneous samples. So where you sample, you could have hit a capsaicin hotspot or you could have hit a capsaicin low spot. So we did cover that, let's say, in the weekly webinar as well. We did describe that the experience with FoodSense really is one of you get the result on your phone and most people are happy with that. But there are advanced users who actually want to understand their data a bit more. So we did actually talk about 3 classes of data, which I called intense, dilute, and anvil. But I do consider that kind of quite an advanced, let's say, conversation. Now, at ZP, we like to basically, we do get a lot of technical questions. Not all technical questions are necessarily, linked to sales. Some of them are just kind of more inquisitive than anything. So we did do a weekly webinar, for example, called the ZP Developer Zone, where we try to answer questions that have come in for the week. The next one is on the 25th of January 2024 at approximately 8 a.m. So it just comes down to this. If you've got any technical questions and you want to reach out to ZP, we're pretty good at, I think we always get complimented on the speed at which we actually at least respond to the initial inquiries. And if you've got any questions, I think it's a kind of case of don't hesitate to reach out to us. And if you do it quickly, you may get into the webinar on the 25th of January 2024 and we'll answer them there. Otherwise, if you, that's the news from ZP for this week, and I hope everyone has a good week. Okay, thanks very much.